Well, this wasn't the first time you fought for veterans' rights. In the past, you've also defended so-called atomic veterans and veterans subjected to secret government tests. How did you get involved working with veterans in the first place, Gordy?
Well, it's kind of a fluke, really. I early on in my career, I did some poverty law, and I worked in that area. And my father was at Bikini, the atomic bomb tests at Operation Crossroads, on the scientific vessel, actually, there, the USS Bowditch. And he and quite a number of other people on that ship, because it was there the longest of any of the vessels, ended up getting cancer or leukemia. And I started to work with a group, well, when he was sick with leukemia, I just started to work with a local group here in the Bay Area that was an atomic veterans group. And I got to know them, and I got into that, and that's how I got into the atomic test series cases. And my dad died actually very early on in those years, but it's always sort of been he's been a symbol for me of what you should do for veterans. They deserve a lot more, and the way he was treated I thought was just ridiculous. But along the way, I handled my mother's death claim for his death, and it's kind of an odd thing in life, the way the ball bounces, but that claim ended up being the first case ever heard in the newly created U.S. Court of Veterans Appeals, which I had testified before Congress about the first time they provided judicial review of VA decisions. This was in 1990. And it was the first case argued in front of the new court, and it was the first decision ever issued by the court. Erspamer versus Derwinski.
Wow.
One Veterans Appellate 3, the very first case, and it established the jurisdiction of the court. And at that point, my mother's claim had been pending 11 years.
Unbelievable.
11 years.
Wow.
And there was no remedy at that time. So that delay issue, I was very sensitive to that delay issue at the time, because, you know, you send a letter and 4 or 5 years would go by, or you send a succession of letters. You never hear from them. Just never hear from them. You just go out into that great void. And for veterans, a lot of veterans, it's very frustrating. And it's designed to make people give up.
Yep.
And it's just not right. It's just not right to make them give up, make their families give up, and make them do without. But that was the first case, but I kept it on, and I've always had a few individual cases. I did a case for Phil Cushman, you probably don't even know about, but was representing for over 10 years. He's a Vietnam veteran who had a sandbag fall into the small of his back during a bunker attack in Vietnam, and broke his back very badly, and has a post in his back. And we fought for years, and I guess it was a year and a half ago, at the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, finally decided the constitutional issue in his case, and big, huge due process win for veterans. The government argued veterans don't have a property interest in receiving disability compensation, even though, you know, the standard law Goldberg v. Kelly, you know, many years ago, 45 years ago, that welfare recipients have a property interest in receiving welfare benefits. Wow. But the veterans don't. And they're the ones that, I mean, this is service-connected disability benefits. Well, the panel on the D.C. Circuit was not very impressed with that argument, and the Cushman case became even though it was an individual claim, became a very important precedent decision for veterans' rights. And it was actually cited in the PTSD, the recent PTSD case decision in the Ninth Circuit. And then I did a couple others. I did one for an African American soldier who was in World War II, who was it was really an example of discrimination in the military, which was very institutionalized at the time. But he was hurt at the local base where he was being trained, and they took him over to the main hospital. I think was it Letterman? I forget. And they refused to treat him. They refused to treat him. Whites only at this hospital.
And they stated that.
They said, yep. And so his buddies took him back into the hospital, and they found a closet, and they stuck him in a hospital bed. They found a hospital bed, and they stuck him in a closet, and they treated him from the back of the hospital. And he developed all kinds of problems as a result of the lack of treatment. that plagued him his whole life. He was, things you don't like to talk about, but like incontinence. And we won that case in the Court of Veterans Appeals. So what struck me then, and it still strikes me, is how underserved the veteran population is, particularly with respect to a lot of these major cases that affect lots of veterans and things that they do. I mean, that the VA does. I mean, they just change the rules in the middle of the game, and they just issue a letter. They call them fast letters. And they just issue them, and suddenly everything changes, and then a lot of claims get denied. I mean, it's crazy. A really good example. There was concern if a veteran has got a certain degree of disability. I think it's 70% minimum, based upon actual problems, and is unemployable. And there's a test for that. You can get total disability based upon individual unemployability, which means you get 100% rather than 70 or 60 or whatever the minimum is. Well, the new administration came in, they looked through and they said, well, we've got to get all these, too many veterans on the rolls, as if they were welfare rolls. And so they went through and they sent a letter around to all the regional offices across the country. You're granting too many of these total disability claims. Start, take a closer look at them, and we're going to require that we approve everyone you grant in Washington first. Well, the rate went down 97. The grant rate went down 97% overnight. Suddenly, they're not granting them. I mean, they know how to. Subtlety is not their forte. They adjudicators quickly discerned that they don't want us to grant any of these claims. So they stopped granting them.
Unbelievable.